This is BBC1 in the East. Now the news at 10 o'clock with Fiona Bruce and Ellie Barker.
The government backs down over one of the key parts of its new anti-terrorism plans. The proposed crime of glorifying terrorism, drawn up after the London bombings, has been rewritten after widespread criticism. But there'll be no change to the equally controversial plan to allow terrorist suspects to be held for 90 days without charge. Also tonight, a huge operation to target the finances of the man believed to be the head of the IRA. Michael Howard bows out as Tory leader with a passionate call for unity.
And action!
And the next James Bond film will be made abroad, as Britain's film industry says it's fighting for survival.
Here in the East, asylum seekers and hundreds of homes are evacuated as experts tackle a huge wartime bomb. And after the raids, the region's biggest gang of drug dealers is in court to learn its fate.
Good evening. The Home Secretary, Charles Clarke, has backed down over his plan to introduce a new crime of glorifying terrorism after widespread criticism. He now says that praising terrorism alone won't be against the law. The offender must also intend to incite acts of terrorism. But he intends to press on with plans to detain suspected terrorists for up to 3 months without charge. One eminent law lord has told the BBC he thinks that's unlawful. Here's our Home Affairs correspondent, Margaret Gilmore.
The July the 7th attacks showed the government just what they were up against. British bombers off the radar of the intelligence agencies. In the months since, ministers have pledged a hardline offensive against terrorist suspects and against those who support or encourage terrorism. They outlined plans for a new offence of glorifying terrorism, aimed at the likes of Sheikh Omar Bakri, who has a history of preaching fiery anti-Western sermons of hate and who recently left the UK. But government critics claim the planned offence was not clearly defined and was unenforceable. And today the Home Secretary revised his plans.
I wouldn't say it's watering it down. We believe that glorification of terrorism is wrong and should be outlawed in law. We've made that clear all the way through. But a number of people have made observations to the effect that there were difficulties in the wording we originally suggested. And so we thought bringing together the glorification and the incitement clauses in the bill would be the best way to deal with that.
In a letter to his Labour and Tory counterparts, Charles Clarke explains that simply glorifying terrorism will not in fact now become an offence, unless it goes further and the words of the Speaker are understood by its audience as an inducement to terrorism. Put another way, the words must actively incite future terrorism. Opposition MPs say it is a U-turn.
Well, I think it is a climb down. Common sense has finally prevailed. It was quite apparent from the outset that this had been put forward, I have to say, a bit as a gimmick, but originated from the Prime Minister. And it then got incorporated in the legislation. It became immediately apparent when one looked at the draft, the idea behind it, that it would be completely unworkable.
But there's no sign of a government back down on another controversial clause in the draft bill, giving police power to hold terrorist suspects for up to 3 months without charge. Vital, say anti-terrorist officers who want to arrest some suspects to prevent attacks and then collect firm evidence against them later. It's an idea roundly rejected by a newly retired law lord who suggests it's unlawful in an interview for next Sunday's Panorama.
In my view, this new power is likely to be found incompatible with the European Convention on Human Rights. Article 5.3 is quite explicit. It says in peremptory language that any person who is detained or is arrested must be brought before a court promptly. And in my view, a period exceeding 14 days will be found to be in breach of that human rights safeguard.
The Home Secretary also published new plans today to give police powers to temporarily close places of worship which are being used by extremists. Margaret Gilmore, BBC News.
And Margaret is with me now. Margaret, this amendment by the Home Secretary to this proposed crime of glorifying terrorism, how significant is that?
Well, let me put it into context. Next Wednesday, the Home Secretary is going to publish a new terrorism bill. He knows it's controversial. Because of this, he actually published a draft of the bill a month ago, and there was outcry. And he has been looking to find ways to make it more palatable to his critics, hence the changes today. And to give him his due, these changes do seem to have eased some of that opposition.
There has been some controversy today over some papers he released.
Yes, very interesting documents here, written by the head of the anti-terrorist branch in justification for increasing the length of time a terrorist suspect can be held. And in his arguments, he has quoted some ongoing current court cases, highly unusual. Some lawyers tonight suggesting that this could land the government in trouble. The Home Office tonight has said actually it has been in touch with the Crown Prosecution Service. It checked out everything it was going to publish in advance and cleared it, and they do not believe what they have published here will jeopardise those trials.
OK, Margaret, thanks very much. And just a reminder, you can hear more from Lord Steyne and other key figures in the terrorism debate in Panorama at 10:15 on Sunday evening here on BBC1. A series of properties have been raided across Manchester in an operation aimed at recovering illegally held IRA funds. 250 houses were targeted, valued at around £30 million. The investigation is believed to be linked to Thomas Slab Murphy, who's widely thought to be the head of the IRA. Mark Simpson is in Manchester tonight. Mark.
Good evening, Fiona. Well, I've been told that the raids here in Manchester have now finally finished for the evening. A number of properties have been searched from top to bottom, including this one here. Of course, this IRA investigation has been a huge shock to many people. And of course, it's also been a huge shock to the Northern Ireland peace process. The IRA bombed the centre of Manchester 9 years ago, but now it seems it may be cashing in on the city's newfound wealth. The profits from up to 250 properties are under investigation, and that led to early morning raids at domestic and business addresses across the city.
They did an house over there this morning, first thing this morning. An house over there, and then we're seeing them all coming from this direction, coming from that direction, over at backs here as well. Yeah, we're a bit scary.
Much of the focus of the operation was on this property firm in Sale, the Craven Group. In response, a company solicitor said tonight they were cooperating with the authorities and insisted no wrongdoing had taken place. The home of the company director, millionaire businessman Dermot Craven, was also raided. The Ferrari in the garage was left, but not much else. The searches were led by the Belfast-based Assets Recovery Agency. It's believed they're investigating the business dealings of this man, Thomas Slab Murphy, reputed to be the IRA's so-called Chief of Staff. He was first named as an IRA leader 20 years ago. Based at a South Armagh farm, it's been claimed he's been heavily involved in cross-border smuggling. Ceasefire or no ceasefire, this border area has always been one of the IRA's heartlands and referred to as some as bandit country. Today's move against the IRA suggests the authorities on both sides of the border are stepping up their fight against criminality.
There are some people in political life who seem to think that every criminal offence that they commit is not a crime, and therefore who seem to think that they can hold on to their proceeds.
The £26 million Northern Bank raid in December showed just how sophisticated IRA criminality can be. Before today, the Assets Recovery Agency had moved more against loyalists rather than Republicans. But what a day for it to change tack, with Jerry Adams having an appointment at Downing Street. He preferred not to talk about it.
We're not going to be part of trying anyone by the media. The reality is that people do have rights, and we will stand by those.
As on most things, Ian Paisley had a different view.
I wish the police every success, and I trust that soon these people will be brought to the courts, have British justice applied to them and removed from our society, which they have cursed far too long.
No arrests have so far been made today, but given the extent of the material recovered, to some extent, this investigation is only just beginning.
And Mark, what kind of political fallout, if any, is there likely to be from these raids for the peace process?
Well, let's be honest, this has been a bad news day for the peace process, coming, as it does, 10 days after a good news story with the IRA saying it has got rid of all of its weapons. But I think today has been overall a reminder, if a reminder were needed, that the end of all the IRA's weapons doesn't necessarily mean an end to the IRA, and that will continue to be a major problem.
Mark, thanks very much. The trial has begun at the Old Bailey of a man and woman accused of failing to warn the authorities that their brother was planning a suicide bombing in Israel. It's alleged that Parveen and Zahid Sharif, both from Derby, knew that their brother Omar was going to attack a bar in Tel Aviv in 2003. They deny the charges. Michael Howard has formally announced his resignation as leader of the Conservative Party. In his last leader speech at the Tory conference, he called on the party and its MPs to unite behind his successor. Mr Howard will stay on until the new leader is appointed, probably in December. Our political editor Nick Robinson reports from Blackpool.
Suddenly, everybody wants the signature of the next Tory leader, but will it be him? Or will it be him whose photo is on every front page in 2 months' time? It could still be him. And never rule him out. But of course, it was meant to be him. Only the favourite ends this conference, having to force a smile onto his face. They'd gathered to bid farewell to an ex-leader, with all minds, even his, on who was coming next.
I've come to the conclusion that I owe it to you to name, here and now, the person I want to be leader of the opposition.
Cue nervous laughter from a bevy of candidates.
My choice is Gordon Brown.
Who's his real choice, he didn't say, but boy did he hint, telling his party it had to start speaking to the iPod generation.
These people have high hopes for Britain. They see a glass half full. They're looking to the future, confident that Britain's best days lie ahead. And so must we.
That is almost word for word what David Cameron has said. The soon-to-be ex-leader had one last message for the party he says he loves.
Hold your heads up high. Be strong and of good courage. Unite behind a new leader. And then fight to build a better Britain. Go for it.
This party said farewell to its new leader, but standing behind us here, one of these men is the new man to lead the opposition, to take on Blair and Brown. Who will it be? This party simply doesn't know.
And neither does he. David Davis is ruining a day and a speech which his opponents are ruthlessly exploiting.
Enthusing your own people ought to be fairly straightforward. Dealing with Gordon Brown, the Labour Party, and persuading the general public is inevitably even more complicated.
Ouch. All Mr Davis could do was admit he'd had a difficult day.
Not the headlines I would have chosen this morning, but you have to say that if I win this contest, the next 4 years, there'll be tougher days. And one of the marks or the tests of leadership, frankly, is going through the odd difficult day.
A day that ended with the bookies dropping Davis as favourite and picking Cameron instead.
Michael Howard's farewell gift to his party was a spectacular seaside show of competing political ambitions. It's a show that's thrust David Cameron into the spotlight and David Davis a little into the shadows. Mr Howard admits it was all a great gamble. Not half as much a gamble as the Tory party is about to take when it picks its new leader. A gamble that begins next week in earnest in Westminster. That won't just affect careers, the party's future, but the country's future as well. Nick Robinson, BBC News, Blackpool.
Still to come on tonight's programme. Do prisoners have the right to vote? A European court has ruled that they do. And a bitter clash off the rugby pitch between the clubs and the game's ruling body. The Iraqi president has told Tony Blair that the withdrawal of British troops from his country would be catastrophic. Meeting President Jalal Talabani in London, Mr Blair told him that the troops would stay as long as he wants them. He also repeated claims that Iran was providing explosives to Iraqi insurgents used to kill British troops. Here's our Middle East editor, Jeremy Bowen.
In number 10, President Talabani recalled that as a young man in Iraq in colonial times, he shouted for the British to go home. Now he was begging them to stay, to stop the violence getting any worse. There were more suicide bombs in Iraq today and more killing. Iraq's president chose not to repeat Britain's allegations that Iranians have supplied weapons used against British troops. Mr. Blair was less diplomatic about Iran.
We're there with the support of the United Nations-backed Iraqi government. There is no justification for Iran or any other country interfering in Iraq.
But the guerrilla war being fought by Sunnis in the center of the country is Iraq's biggest problem. The Baghdad government and its Western friends believe that making Iraq democratic will eventually cut away support for the insurgency.
We've got to, at every single level, expose these elements that are trying to destroy a new Iraq getting on its feet, and realize this is a battle now for the future of Iraq, for the future of the region, I actually believe for the future security of the world.
The next stage of the democracy plan that started with elections last January is a vote on a new constitution next week. Optimists believe that participating in politics will bring the country together, whichever way the referendum goes.
Even those who are against the draft of constitution, they are going to participate in election and say no in the election.
Britain and the US hope the constitution will also point them towards the exit from Iraq, but there's a much less encouraging scenario. If the constitution passes the referendum, it could make things worse, not better. It's an ambiguous, imperfect document, and it could drive Iraqis further apart towards full-blown civil war and the breakdown of their nation. Jeremy Bowen, BBC News, in Downing Street.
And there's a full interview with President Talabani on Newsnight over on BBC 2 after the news. A former prisoner who served 24 years for manslaughter has overturned the current ban that means prisoners can't vote. A European court ruled that it breached his human rights. The government says it will now review the law, but is making no promises that prisoners will now be allowed to cast a ballot. Our Home editor Mark Easton reports.
So it's not about the story reads like a Hollywood script. The reformed axe killer who taught himself law behind bars took on the state and won. John Hurst argued Britain's historic ban on convicted prisoners voting was a breach of human rights.
Because they're human beings, unless their crime is linked to, say, electoral fraud or something like that, why should you deny them the vote?
However, government lawyers argue that the judgment may not result in a single prisoner getting the right to vote. Their view is that the ruling only forces Britain to abandon its blanket ban and introduce a threshold beyond which convicts are disenfranchised. And that threshold could include every prisoner in the land. Can you imagine any prisoners, as a result of this judgment, being allowed to vote convicted in jail?
Well, we need to look at the basis of the law.
You can imagine it, though.
We need to consider the basis of the law. Serious offences that lead to the convicted prisoner going to jail will, I think, continue to attract a situation where they can't vote.
It's not just the right to vote that's at stake. Today's judgment states that, with the exception of the right to liberty, prisoners generally continue to enjoy all their fundamental rights. Campaigners are already challenging other aspects of the prison regime. In Scotland, a convicted armed robber recently won damages after arguing that so-called slopping out in prison breached his human rights. Hundreds more prisoners are in line to win compensation. Other potential challenges include the argument that a prisoner's right to a family life is breached if they're jailed a long way from home, that degrading treatment includes long periods locked in a cell, or that freedom of expression is compromised by a bar on access to computers and the internet. Already, Article 9, guaranteeing freedom of religion, has led prisons to offer pagan and, in some cases, Rastafarian worship inside jail. And the prison's ombudsman recently ruled that most prisoners in England and Wales had the right to in-cell television.
If the Act can be used constructively, then that's clearly going to be a good thing. If it's going to take us some way towards making prison a more decent, a more humane, a more effective place for those very few people who have actually got to be locked up.
Today's ruling once again questions Britain's human rights record and forces government to justify its treatment of prisoners. In doing so, the European Court has reopened the debate on where human rights stop and punishment starts. Mark Easton, BBC News.
The next film about Britain's most famous spy is to be made outside Britain. The news that the new James Bond movie is going to Prague is the latest blow to the film industry, which currently only has a handful of blockbusters in production. Many are now being filmed in Eastern Europe, where costs are lower. But filmmakers here are also blaming the removal of what they say are vital tax concessions. Rory Kathleen-Jones explains.
Deep in the Surrey woods, a small army is gathering. 300 people to shoot just one car chase in a big-budget movie, The Children of Men. Britain has been a popular location for Hollywood studios, but amid uncertainty about tax breaks, this is one of the few blockbusters now in production. The producer took his last film, Cold Mountain, to Romania and says shooting this one here was a tricky decision.
We looked at Romania, we considered Ireland, but we took a pretty brave decision, which is to swim against the tide somewhat and shoot the film where it was set, in London.
Blockbusters have been thin on the ground since tax rules changed. 2003 was a boom year, with Hollywood spending over £700 million in Britain. Last year, that fell to around £550 million, and this year's total is expected to be a little over £300 million.
And action!
Now another big blow. The last James Bond movie, like all the others, was mainly shot in the UK. But tonight, the production company told the BBC most of the next one, Casino Royale, will be shot in Prague, not Pinewood. That means even less work for London's many post-production companies. His sound editing studio has worked on many of the blockbusters of recent years. Now it's struggling.
We're here to make big movies. I mean, we make small movies, we do really well on small movies, but we were put in here to make the big ones, and we're good at it. And if they don't exist, I don't know that we will.
Speak to just about anyone in the UK film industry and they'll admit that the old tax regime was something of a scam, with millions poured into no-hope films just to reap the tax breaks. But they'll also tell you that their industry is now struggling to survive because other countries can offer far more. The Barrandov Studios in Prague attracts blockbusters with lower costs rather than tax breaks. But around the world, there's plenty of competition.
Many countries around the world are offering subsidies, and to keep up, really, you've either got to offer subsidies or you've got to offer cheap labour. And I mean, living standards here are obviously pretty good, so tax incentives are almost the best way to go, really.
The government is promising new, if less generous, tax breaks. But for James Bond, at least, the attractions of filming outside Britain have already proved compelling. Rory Kathleen-Jones, BBC News.
A serious club versus country row has broken out in Rugby Union. The sport's governing body, the RFU, wants club sides to give their England players more time to train for internationals. If it doesn't get its way, it's threatened to try to take over the players' contracts. More details from Ollie Foster.
The best players in England train together at Loughborough today. Next month they play Australia, New Zealand and Samoa. The head coach Andy Robinson says these get-togethers are vital as he rebuilds the world champions. But on what foundations? The RFU want even more time with the players. The clubs feel they have quite enough. There's an uneasy standoff.
I've stated my case, and they know what I want and what I think is important for both club and country moving forward.
The RFU has proposed to take control of the players full-time. A few extra England training days is a likely compromise. They may be jealous of Wales, where harmony between clubs and country produced Grand Slam winners. There is an agreement in place in England, but the clubs feel the RFU are flouting it and may take legal action.
My feeling at the moment is that that isn't the case now. I think this is where we're, it really is a serious position. And that I think people do need to realise on both sides that, if nothing is, if no agreement is reached, I think it could do serious damage.
2 years ago, clubs and country were united behind the rugby team, but they stand at a crossroads with 2 years until the defence of their title. They need everyone on side.
Why would we want to sit back and rest on our laurels if we'll live on the back of that for the next 20 years? We want to make sure that we're successful as soon as we possibly can.
So many factors contributed to England's World Cup success, but the goodwill of the clubs can't be underestimated. So 2 years on, England would be well advised not to take it for granted. Unless there's an agreement by the end of next month, this row may well be decided in the courts, as if England's trials on the pitch weren't enough. Ollie Foster, BBC News.
Finally, after 25 years, Peter Snow has announced he will no longer be accompanying his famous swingometer on the BBC's election night programmes.
The challenge in front of Neil Kinnock was to push this pendulum right the way across here, turning these blue MPs red to something like 8%.
As the years went by, Peter's swingometer became more and more sophisticated.
Here he comes. Here she comes. Now, if that pendulum moves over that way, those red Labour
Unfortunately, however transformed the swingometer became, its master was left untouched. And we'll miss him. We'll be back a little later with the latest on the day's headlines, but now it's time to join our news teams across the UK. Bye for now.
A very good evening from Look East. Almost 200 asylum seekers have been removed from an immigration centre near Cambridge tonight. Bomb disposal experts are preparing to blow up 2 massive Second World War bombs discovered in fields nearby.
It took the immigration service a few hours to evacuate its reception centre for refugees at Longstanton. Mainly women and children, they were told to pack the few belongings they had as coaches waited to take them to immigration bases across the UK. Behind the centre, hundreds of yards away in a field, are 2 massive bombs set to be destroyed in a controlled explosion tomorrow.
They've been in the ground for 60 years or so the condition of the nose is quite good. However, the tail end of them is not so good.
This evening, police told people living in 400 homes within a mile radius of the bombs that they had to leave by tomorrow morning.
You've just got to cope with it, carry on, and
we should rely on our policemen to look after them.
Yeah, of course.
While we're away.
Yeah.
Keep your eye on them.
The local village school will be closed tomorrow as part of the emergency. The bombs were discovered during archaeological work in advance of the building of a new town. A total of 4 have been found in the past week. It's feared many more may lay undiscovered in the area, but the immediate priority is to get through tomorrow. This evening, dozens more sandbags were brought into the village. They're being stacked around the bombs to minimise fallout from the controlled explosion.
Tonight, this immigration reception centre stands empty of asylum seekers. The 180 who were being held here have been taken to immigration centres across the country, among them the Earls Wood Immigration Centre in Bedfordshire. It's not clear when they will return.
More than 20 drug dealers have been in court today accused of dealing on a significant scale. They were arrested as part of a major crackdown on dealers in King's Lynn. They'll be sentenced tomorrow and will probably be jailed.
This is how they picked them up.
Go, go, go! Get away from me then, this ain't funny!
And this is just some of what they found. Wads of cash, jewellery and lots of drugs.
That's one of the largest seizures of amphetamine I've seen in the King's Lynn area for a long, long while. Potentially the state that's seized in is around £33,000. And obviously you can see there's a very large amount of cash, vehicles were seized, and the impact that sends out to the community in that area is that we will not tolerate drug dealing within North Lynn.
It was one of the largest drugs operations ever carried out in Norfolk. Most of those they picked up were street dealers, people like Dean Cook. His house was full of drug paraphernalia. Officers also found £6,000 worth of ecstasy tablets and dealer notes showing how connected he was with the local drug scene. His brother Paul made so much money he was able to buy this £18,000 car using bags of £2 coins. He was claiming benefit at the time. That's what made the police suspicious. In all, 25 dealers were arrested. 22 are at court in Norwich for sentence.
We've taken a number of significant drug dealers off the streets of West Norfolk. Most of the people we arrested were dealing openly in the streets in line with members of the public. And quite clearly that has a detrimental effect.
One gang could be found in this car park at the same time every day. They paid a friend half a gram of heroin for driving them around, while a mother and her daughter dealt from this flat across the road from the police station, watched by the daughter's 80-month-old baby. This case is giving us a glimpse into the drug scene in King's Lynn, but this place is no different to any other big town in this region. And the other depressing thing is that although they've taken out 25 drug dealers, the police believe their place has already been taken by others. Andrew Sinclair, BBC Look East in King's Lynn.
Now a question. How much would you pay for a young racehorse that's never run a race, let alone won one? Well, the answer may well surprise you, as Ian Winter reports.
Tomorrow is a big day in the short life of Bradley Roper. The 16-year-old apprentice jockey will ride his first ever race on Summer Charm. The horse costs just 4,500 guineas, and it's already won 4 races. At his yard in Newmarket, trainer William Jarvis knows there are no racing certainties when it comes to buying a racehorse.
We've had relatively inexpensive horses that have done phenomenally well on the race course, and we've sold on for an awful lot of money. We've also had some pretty expensive failures as well.
Everywhere you look at Tattersalls, people are clutching the sales catalogue. It contains almost 700 yearlings, unraced and unnamed. The trick is to separate the potential winners from the also-rans. And that's where the bloodstock agent comes in. Under this hat you'll find Charlie Gordon Watson. He's been casting an expert eye over young racehorses for 20 years. Wealthy clients all over the world trust him to spend their money wisely, backing his judgment with their cash.
You're a talent scout, basically, and you're trying to picture things and you're looking at them and trying to imagine what they're going to grow into. So I try and balance the pedigree, the budget and the conformation equally. I mean, you get best value.
Inside the sale room, Charlie wastes no time in spending 60,000 guineas on a bay colt for one of his Arab clients. But that's small beer compared to the star of the show. One horse is attracting serious money from 2 rival bidders. As the price shoots up, the atmosphere grows tense, and then suddenly,
Thank you very much indeed, sir. Gainsborough stud.
Sold to the Gainsborough stud for 1.25 million guineas. Ian Winter, BBC Look East, Newmarket.
We're on to the weather tonight. There'll be some clear spells, but it'll turn cloudy and misty. Temperatures down to 11 degrees Celsius. Tomorrow there'll be some early mist or fog patches, but this should clear later. Well, that's it from the Lake team here in Cambridge. Now it's time to hand you back to Fiona Bruce in London for the headlines. A very good night. Bye-bye.
And the main news tonight, the government has backed down over one of the key parts of its new anti-terrorism plans. The proposed crime of glorifying terrorism, drawn up after the London bombings, has been rewritten after widespread criticism. And some breaking news tonight. New York officials have just said they're going to increase security on the city's underground network after what they call a credible threat. Newsnight is getting underway over on BBC 2, but from all of us on the 10 o'clock team, good night.
Good evening. Tomorrow's weather will be very similar to today's. And Wednesdays and Tuesdays. Yes, the weather's been stuck in a bit of a rut this week. We will see a change for the weekend, but for tomorrow, well, it's more of the same, which means most of us will stay dry, but also it is going to be pretty cloudy. Now, we had some lovely sunshine today across northeastern Scotland, still largely clear skies here through the night, but elsewhere the map, that darker shade of brown telling us there will be an awful lot of cloud, maybe a little bit of drizzle in places, but most of us will stay dry, and a relatively mild night, temperatures not dropping below about 11 or 12 degrees. Perhaps turning a bit cooler than that in northern Scotland where we keep the clear skies, but here again tomorrow, that's where we'll have the best of the sunshine, but there is a weather front, a band of rain just threatening to edge its way southwards across the Western Isles. From the central lowlands southwards, though, it's more of the dull weather. A lot of cloud across northern England, the Midlands, East Anglia and the southeast. Perhaps across parts of the south, some mist and fog patches in the morning as well. Now, the mist and fog should tend to lift. The cloud might just break up a little bit more across England and Wales. Perhaps a few brighter spells come the afternoon. But the big change is up to the northwest. That rain will get in across the Western Isles eventually and also push in across western parts of Northern Ireland. So maybe some rain for Londonderry and Fermanagh in the afternoon. The rain probably not getting to Belfast though until after nightfall. Northwest England also having a dry day. Maybe some brighter skies along the north coast of Wales. That could be a favoured spot for a bit of afternoon sunshine. And the north coast of Devon and Cornwall could also brighten up. Maybe some glimmers of sunshine coming out here. But generally fairly cloudy with a bit more brightness. Temperatures perhaps a little higher than today, but generally no higher than about 15 to 17 degrees. And feeling cooler in the northwest as the rain arrives and the winds pick up. And that rain will spread across most of Scotland and Northern Ireland during Friday evening. It's all, of course, from a weather front, and that weather front will edge its way southeastwards. It will bring the change through the weekend. It'll bring thicker cloud and rain across northern England, Wales and southwest England during Saturday, very slowly pushing its way towards the southeast corner. But southeast England and East Anglia probably dry until after nightfall. Brighter weather coming in behind with a few showers, but then a change again for Sunday. Quite a vicious area of low pressure, a lot of isobars on the chart, some very strong winds coming into that northwest corner during Sunday, as well as turning very windy, also pretty wet, whereas a good part of the country turning brighter as Sunday wears on. That's all from me. Good night.
Next tonight on BBC1, Question Time.
This year, for children in need, be what you want to be. For your free fundraising pack, call 0845 607 3333. Go on, you might surprise yourself.
After the terror attack of 7/7, Tony Blair believes new threats demand new laws. Cherie Blair fears a response that could threaten our democratic values. Tony Blair believes our safety is of paramount importance. Cherie Blair warns the rights of the individual must be protected. This Sunday, Panorama unpicks the heartfelt differences of opinion that separate Tony and Cherie. Blair v Blair. Sunday, 10:15, BBC One.
For the first time on British television, BBC Two brings you the inside story.
Well, I fudged actually a little bit.
On the Israel-Arab conflict.
They want to squeeze me. Arafat is the main obstacle to peace.
With exclusive access to all the key players.
Arafat is about to get into his car, and I keep yelling, "Shut the gates!"
And that kind of put a chill on the dessert service.
Israel and the Arabs' elusive peace starts Monday at 9 on BBC Two.
Lost and found, bad food guide. The kitchen nightmares of a nation on rations. Horse meat, whale meat and shocking service. One man's quest to overcome it all and create the first ever good food guide. Here and ready to watch.
Bad Food Guide, part of the Lost Decade. Find it Tuesday at 9 on BBC4. Simon Sharma and P.D. James join Andrew Neil this week in an hour here on BBC One after Question Time.